The most dangerous sign in a man, according to Carl Jung. He was always the nice guy, the one who helped carry groceries, the neighbor who waved every morning, the husband who never raised his voice, always paid his taxes and brought home flowers on anniversaries. Everyone said he was a good man. But when things went wrong, it was never his fault. When someone pulled away, he said, "They're too sensitive." When his wife stopped talking to him, he shrugged, "I was only trying to help." And when she finally left after 30 years, he whispered, not with anger but with confusion, "She must have misunderstood me." And yet, being around him left a chill in the room. You couldn't quite name it, but your gut knew something was off. Not dangerous in the obvious way, but in the way that made you doubt your own instincts. Carl Jung once warned, "The most dangerous man is not the one who rages, but the one who believes he has no darkness at all." Carl Jung once warned, "The most dangerous man is not the one who rages, but the one who believes he has no darkness at all." And if you've lived long enough, you've probably met that man. Maybe he was your brother-in-law. Maybe he wore a white collar. Maybe he looked a little like you. I once knew a man like that. His name was Dave. If you've lived long enough, you've met this man. Maybe it was your brother-in-law, polite to a fault, but always correcting your kids. Maybe it was your old pastor, kind in public but always made you feel small, or your manager at work. Never cursed, never raised his voice. But people left his team more anxious than when they started. He was polished, measured, always knew the right words, but something in you couldn't rest. You found yourself second-guessing, hesitating before you spoke, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't allow in the room. You couldn't laugh too loud. You couldn't get too emotional. There was no space for mess or pain or truth. I once knew a man like that. Never raised his voice. Never slammed a door, but when his wife left him after 30 years, he sat across from me, staring into his coffee and said, "I don't get it. I was calm. I was loyal. I never yelled. I was a good man. So why did she leave?" That question haunted him, and to be honest, it haunted me too, because at one point in my life, I asked the same thing. I once knew a man like that. His name was Dave. We met at a support group for men over 50, divorced, disoriented, wondering what the hell just happened. He was 58, 2 adult kids, a long, steady marriage, 3 decades of mortgage, payments, family trips, PTA meetings, Sunday church. He had built the life everyone said was right. On the outside, he seemed fine. He still wore his wedding ring for weeks after she left. He still mowed the lawn every Saturday like clockwork. But if you looked in his eyes, you saw something unraveling. One night after the meeting, he asked if I wanted to grab a beer. We sat down and I asked him what happened. "Honestly, I don't know," he said. "I didn't cheat. I never hit her. I worked hard. I came home every night. I always did the responsible thing." I nodded. I knew that speech. I had said it myself once. He looked down at his hands. She told me, "It wasn't anything I did, it was what I never did." She said I was never really with her, that I was there, but distant, like I lived next to her, not with her. He shook his head. The pain wasn't anger, it was confusion. That kind of heartbreak doesn't scream, it sinks. He started talking about the little things, how she used to cry in the bathroom, how she'd ask, "What are you feeling?" And he'd shrug, "I'm fine." How he thought being strong meant never showing doubt, never needing help. He wasn't cold, he wasn't cruel, but he was absent. He told me, "I didn't know she needed more than stability. I didn't know silence could hurt. I thought if I just stayed calm and didn't rock the boat, we'd be okay." Then came the line, "I'll never forget. I didn't realize. I was disappearing until she was gone." That hit me like a truck, because the truth is, men like Dave, men like me, we were taught to be good, but we were never taught to be real. And when you go too long without being real, the people closest to you stop feeling safe, not because of what you say, but because of what you refuse to feel. And as I listened to Dave, something clicked. It wasn't just his marriage that fell apart, it was everything he had been taught about, what it means to be a good man. That's when I started to see the deeper pattern. Dave wasn't a bad man, and that's what made this so hard for him to understand. He thought goodness was enough, and in many ways, it is. But only when that goodness includes your full self, not just the parts you've polished for the world. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. It's the version of us we learn to present to the world, hard-working. Calm, stable, useful, all good things. But when it becomes the only thing, it's a performance, not presence. And behind that mask lurks the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide: anger, desire, jealousy, vulnerability, fear of being rejected, even the simple need to be loved and seen for who we really are. Dave never yelled, he never hit, but that doesn't mean he wasn't hurting the people around him. Because when you suppress your own emotions, you also become numb to everyone else's. You can't connect with what you won't allow in yourself. His wife wasn't asking him to be perfect. She was asking him to be present, to feel something with her, to sit with her in her mess. But Dave had spent his entire adult life being the man who solved things, not the man who felt things. John Gottman, one of the most respected marriage researchers, called it emotional withdrawal. He found that one of the top predictors of divorce isn't shouting or cheating. It's silence, that chilling quiet that creeps into the kitchen, the lack of eye contact, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the feeling of sitting next to someone who's physically there, but emotionally gone. Dave didn't mean to hurt her, but that's the thing about emotional distance. It hurts anyway, and when you pair a strong persona with an unacknowledged shadow, you create something even more dangerous. A man who believes he's good, but who doesn't realize how much of himself he's buried just to stay that way. He shows kindness, but it's laced with quiet judgment. He offers help, but only on his terms. He stays calm, not because he's at peace, but because he's terrified of what might come out if he lets go. And eventually, the people around him start to feel it, the tension behind the smile, the subtle control behind the charm, the coldness behind the "I'm fine." Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's what Dave, and so many of us, were never taught to do. We were taught how to behave, not how to be, and you can only pretend for so long before someone or something thus calls your bluff. So what now? What do you do when you realize that being good wasn't enough because you were never truly present? So, what do you do when you realize you've been living behind a mask, not just at work, not just with friends, but in your own home, in your marriage, in your mirror? Here's the truth. No one tells us as men. The path forward isn't about fixing. It's not about talking more. It's not about suddenly becoming emotional or poetic or romantic. The healing doesn't begin with action, it begins with presence. What Dave needed wasn't a plan. He didn't need marriage counseling or books on communication or another date night on the calendar. He needed one real moment, one quiet, brave moment where he let his guard down and said something he'd never said in 30 years of marriage. "I'm not sure I'm okay, but I'm here, and I want to listen." No armor. No script, just truth, raw, hesitant, honest, because love doesn't require perfection. It requires realness. We've been taught that women want us to be strong, but what they really want is to not feel alone in the relationship. They want to see that we feel, that we care, that we bleed a little when they hurt, not because we're weak, but because we're human. Carl Jung taught that the shadow only loses power when we face it, not fight it, not conquer it, but befriend it. The anger you buried, let it speak, with honesty, not violence. The fear you've hidden, say it out loud, and not to impress, but to connect. The old wounds you've kept locked away, bring them to the fire gently, because what We suppress becomes what controls us, and the only way to stop the shadow from sabotaging your life is to invite it to the table. The reversal isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like some Hollywood redemption arc. It looks like a 58-year-old man sitting in silence, choosing to stay, even when it's uncomfortable, even when he doesn't have the answers, even when everything in him wants to run. It's the quiet revolution of showing up, not as the man you think you should be, but as the man you actually are. And this is where Jung's wisdom truly begins to unfold, because facing the shadow isn't the end, it's the beginning of becoming whole. Carl Jung once said, "I would rather be whole than good." At first that sounds strange. Why would anyone choose whole over good? But then you live a little longer, and you realize being good in the way the world defines it is often just being agreeable, quiet, pleasant, polished on the outside, but crumbling within. That was Dave. That was me. Maybe that's been you too. Here's what Jung meant. To be whole is to be honest. To be whole is to carry both light and darkness, and not be ashamed of either. It's to say, yes, I have flaws. I get angry. I've been selfish, I've ignored pain, mine and others, but I'm still worthy of love, of truth, of healing. That's not weakness, that's wholeness. The shadow, that dark, quiet part of you, is not your enemy. It is the part of you that has waited for decades for you to look it in the eye and say, I see you, and I will no longer pretend you don't exist. You can't banish your shadow. It doesn't work like that, because every time you suppress it, it finds a new way to leak out, through sarcasm, through distance, through control disguised as care, through your smile that never quite reaches your eyes. But the moment you name it, you begin to reclaim your power. This is what Jung called the individuation process. It's the journey of becoming who you truly are, not what the world wanted, not what your father demanded, not what your wife expected, you, the man beneath the performance. That journey doesn't start with a therapist or a book. It starts the moment you stop saying, I'm fine, and you start saying, I feel lost. I feel regret. I want to change, but I don't know how. You may think that makes you less of a man, but it's the opposite. A man who knows his shadow is a man who cannot be manipulated. He cannot be controlled by guilt, shame, or praise. He moves from a deeper place, a truer place. He becomes solid, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. And when that man walks into a room, people feel it. Women feel it. Life responds. Because the most attractive thing is a man who is no longer running from himself. But this journey isn't just about theory. It's about you, right now, sitting there watching this, wondering if any of it still applies to you. If you're over 50 and you've ever sat in your own living room, surrounded by furniture you paid for, in a house you built, with a woman you once swore you'd grow old with, and still felt completely alone, you're not the only one. If you've ever looked in the mirror and thought, I've done everything right, so why do I feel so empty? Then this was for you. Most of us were never taught how to feel. We were taught how to function, to provide, to fix, to stay calm when things broke, but no one told us what to do when the real break came from inside. Here's what I want you to know, brother. You are not broken, you are not too late, and you are not alone. The fact that you're still here, still watching, still listening, still open, that means the journey has already begun. So if something in this video stirred something in you, leave a comment below. I'm done hiding. I'm ready to be whole. Say it not for the algorithm, but for yourself, so your voice doesn't stay locked in your throat another year, so another man reading that comment knows, okay, I'm not the only one. Let's build something together here, not a place for perfect men, but a place for real men. Men who are tired of pretending, men who are ready to show up. This is smart advice. 50. And this isn't just a channel, it's a mirror, a fire, a bench at the end of a long road, where another man is waiting to say, I see you, welcome back.